My name is Sue Quincy. I'm with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And this is a webinar that is in preparation for the current topic of the Envirothon, looking at climate change and adaptability. And an area of focus that is often being used now because it's an important component when making plans and thinking in terms of adaptation and mitigation is to take in the needs of different people and have different cultures. One specific culture that is very important is the Indigenous point of view. And we have two speakers with us today. Both of them are with the Institute for American Indian Studies out of the Washington Depot here in Connecticut. And if you have not been to their site, it's a wonderful field trip opportunity or an afternoon with a variety of programs that they offer year round. And I'm going to briefly introduce them, but they are going to do a much better job of introducing themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Darlene and Susan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darlene Kascak. I'm the Education Director for the Institute for American Indian Studies, but I'm a whole lot more than just that. I am also a member of the Schaghticoke Tribal Nation. I serve on the Schaghticoke Women's Traditional Council, and I have also been chosen to be a keeper of the traditional Native American stories. So I'm a whole lot of things. This program is going to introduce you a little bit into my culture, how we believe and how we interact with the world, and how that could be beneficial for everyone. Susan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Susan Scherf. I've been with the Institute for almost 5 years. Prior to working at the Institute, I taught environmental education at a place called Frost Valley YMCA in the Catskills, where we had to teach over 50 different courses. There, I became a wildlife rehabilitator, as well as a master bird bander. I learned bird banding on Nantucket with a renowned bird bander named Edith Andrews, who worked for Yukon for years. I also taught on Cape Cod. So I sort of bring the Western side of the sciences to the Institute, but it's again, a perfect marriage because you can't separate the native culture from the environment. So that's what I bring.
Together, Susan and I developed a program. Let me share my screen. Called Etwapmunk. An Etwapmunk translates to being able to use two eyes, Indigenous eyes for one point of view, as well as Western science from the other point of view. And when you use both of these eyes together, you get a more complete story. This program was inspired by Albert Marshall. He's a Mi'kmaq elder. He is a passionate advocate about cross-cultural understanding and the healing of our human responsibilities to care for all creatures of our Mother Earth. So as I said earlier, two-eyed seeing is learning to see with one eye the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledge and ways of knowing, and learning to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. I bring that Indigenous knowledge to this program, and Susan brings that Western knowledge point of view into this program. So the two of us working together on this has been really exciting and very informative for both of us. Another person who inspired this program was Robin Wall Kimmerer. Have any of you read her book, Braiding Sweetgrass? If you haven't, I strongly suggest that you do. She's a mother, a scientist, a decorated professor, an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. We had the opportunity to meet Robin. She did a book signing. It was a collaboration with several organizations where she did a book signing, and I had the opportunity to interview her. She was the most real person I've ever talked to. She is so knowledgeable and so compassionate about what she does. So a lot of her, a lot of influences from her in her book were put into this program as well. She has written a second book. Oh goodness, what's the name of it? Susan, do you remember?
No, we just got it and I haven't even
Yeah.
looked at this museum yet.
I haven't read it yet. But Braiding Sweetgrass is also available in a young adults version, which I think, if you're an educator, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource to give to your students. Now let's cross our fingers that this works.
I think this is where teaching, if you want to go to the next slide, Dar, teaching
Okay.
for me has become full circle after reading Braiding Sweetgrass.
Hold on, it just won't stop playing. Okay.
So what I was getting to is I've been teaching environmental ed since the early 1990s, and coming to the Institute, what I have learned full circle is the Native American connection to the environment, that every living being has a role. So every plant, every animal, every fungus has that role within the natural community. And it's taught at the beginning in Native culture. It's generational learning. So her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, The Honorable Harvest, creates those amazing connections. So I think it behooves all of us to look at how we learn things, and to connect to those things so we can have a better appreciation and understanding.
Thank you for that, Susan.
I hope that was a good filler.
No, thank you. I don't know. Like I say, doing virtual is like nailing Jello to a wall. Never had that happen before. So we're going to challenge your minds a little bit. We're going to ask a series of questions that, make you think, and hopefully make you, in the long run, think in a different way. So the first question I'd like to ask is, do you see the earth as property or a gift? You can type your answers into the chat if you'd like. Wonderful. I like the answers that this group is giving. For people who aren't so ecology minded, that's a difficult question for them when they really, look at how they actually feel. How does the way you view the earth as a gift or property, how does this change your perspective? If you only think of it as property, then you're only worrying about your little space of land, the property that you own. And you're not looking outside of your own, yard, your own property, at how, things are happening in other places. In Western language, living things have no rights in that language. For example, in describing a maple tree as an it, you are devaluing the life of that tree. You're not honoring its life. An example, a basket is an it, and it is an object. In Native American language, everything has a spirit, so there is nothing that is a thing or an it. There are many ways to describe a living spirit. Our language teaches us that everything is both physical and spiritual. For example, in Robin's book, she talks about how a basket represents 30 years of a tree's life. And when you think about things in that manner, you treat those living things a little bit differently. You wouldn't, you wouldn't just purchase a basket and put it on a shelf because it looks pretty. You would honor that 30 years of that tree's life by using that basket, by taking care of that basket, by not, leaving it outside to get weathered and worn and destroyed. You're valuing and honoring the life of that tree that sacrificed itself for that gift of that basket. Here are some examples of what I'm talking about, how our language describes things a little bit differently. The first one, Connecticut. Does that sound familiar? If it does, you could type in the chat what you think it sounds like. Connecticut. Exactly. Connecticut. That's where our own state gets its name from. In the Algonquin language, Connecticut means the place of the long water, referring to the Connecticut River. See how it describes this place? It's not just a word attached to it. It's not a person's name that owned it or discovered it. It describes that place. Here's a few others. Algonquin State Forest. In the Algonquin language, Algonquin means people of the other shore. The Chippewa River or reservoir is a Tungus word that means great pond. Think about these places and what they look like, and you could see how descriptive these words are. Warramog Lake is a Mohegan word meaning good fishing place. And if you've ever fished there, it certainly is. Hammonasset translates to at the place of small islands or sandbars. And when you visit Hammonasset, that's exactly what you see. Small little islands and sandbars. Pagusset is a Quinnipiac word, which means where the river widens. If you look at the location of the original Pagusset territories, it begins right where the river widens. Quassapog is a Quinnipiac word, which means stones in the pond. If you've ever swam at Lake Quassapog, there's small round stones that are all over the bottom of that pond. Quinnipiac is another word you might have heard of. Quinnipiac, the translation is where we change our route. The Quinnipiac area was where Native people would decide whether they were going to continue to follow the shoreline or if they were going to go inland. So it was a major place of making that decision. So do you see how descriptive our words can be? I can go on and on and on. One that really, for me, especially with students, is the word raccoon. Raccoon is an Algonquin word meaning he who washes. And if you know anything about raccoons, they're constantly washing. They like to wash their hands, they like to wash their food, and so on. So our words are very descriptive. It describes a living being. It doesn't objectify it. So we live in a commodity-driven economy. The economic system is driven by consumer spending and behavior. The more we drive, the more fuel we're going to use. The more we eat certain foods, the more, they're going to produce those foods as well. If we drink water from a bottle, they're going to produce more bottled water. In this commodity-driven economy, it's spending that, it's spending that is the driving factor, which is, not often, the best thing, right, for us. Susan, do
And
you want to
shape,
add anything?
yeah, and it shapes our perspective. So if you see a commercial about a certain thing, you may then be fearful. Or if you're shaped by what happens at a school, oh, don't eat a certain food because it's bad for you. So all that shapes that commodity based perspective and language.
This commodity-based thinking has led to overpopulation, deforestation, and pollution as well. Because it's not, Mother Earth that's making these decisions of what we should do. It's, commerce. In Western science, or in Western beliefs, things were done for sometimes very strange reasons. The bison were hunted to almost extinction in the 19th century and were reduced to a few hundred by the 1800s. And the reason for this was simply they wanted to cut off the Native American people from their major food source and way of life. So it's just sad to see this pile of bones, these beautiful lives that were wasted simply because they wanted to cause harm to another group.
And then that has the adverse effects of upsetting the natural balance, not just for the native culture, but the environment. And bringing the wolves back to Yellowstone is proof how they change the herbivores, and they even change the habitat by having that predator there. So the natural balance, the humans are the ones who are constantly upsetting that natural balance.
Exactly. And this is a perfect example of it. And the reasons why is rather sick and twisted, right? It's this kind of thinking that we have to talk about and we have to change.
So this is a map of the dams that are in our state. We have over 4,000 dams in the state of Connecticut. We were a huge part of the Industrial Revolution. Brass City in Waterbury was called that because it produced tons of goods. But again, the dramatic effect on all of our riverways took the balance. We no longer have the Atlantic salmon, who natives relied on. We lost there's only a couple small pockets for the American eel, which again was a huge food source as well as a material for Native Americans. So right there, that upsets the balance.
Now, Indigenous ways of thinking, it's a gift economy. It's a culture of gratitude and reciprocity. Robin Kimmerer says, food in plastic and animals in cages is not a gift, but a theft. This way of thinking, of interacting with the world, has a dramatic impact on the resources and how they're being used. And this is something that I really enjoy teaching other people, because it can change their way that they interact. They can make better choices. Now, we're raised a little bit differently. For example, one of the best things that I enjoyed doing when I was growing up was picking wild strawberries. A large group of us would go out to a field. I would run up to the very first strawberries that I saw, and I'd start picking them away, and I'd get scolded. I was told, no, don't pick the first patch of strawberries you see, because that could be the only patch in this whole area. wait until you see more. So we would wait, we would make that sacrifice, and then a little while later, we'd come to a second patch. Once again, I want to dive in and pick them all for myself, right? But I was told to only pick 1/3 of the strawberries for myself, to leave 1/3 of the strawberries for the animals, because if the animals don't eat, we don't eat, and to leave 1/3 of the strawberries to drop as seeds, so future generation, such as yours, can enjoy strawberries as well. So it's constantly making these choices, thinking about others other than, just ourselves. And this is how Indigenous people were able to keep things in balance here in Connecticut for 13,000 years by, honorably harvesting. Same thing goes with hunting. I was raised that when you go out and you hunt, you don't shoot the first deer that you see. Once again, you wait and you make sure that there's a healthy population in that area. And you don't just shoot any old deer. I was told that you wait until one of them gives you permission. That animal will stop, it'll look towards you, it'll look you in the eye and not run away. And that means that that animal is ready to sacrifice its life to give you the gift of food that you want. And sometimes, excuse me, sometimes you would go home empty-handed because that opportunity never came up where a deer gave you permission to take its life. It's a whole lot different than, standing in a tree stand and just blasting away at the very first deer that you see. It's a more respectful way of hunting. And when we do take the life of a plant or an animal, we would utilize every single bit of it in ways that, are uncountable. For example, there's no difference between taking the life of a plant or taking the life of an animal. It's a living being. There's no difference at all. So to show honor and respect for the gift of, let's say, that animal, we would use everything we could. We would use the hide for clothing. We would harvest the meat. We would use the bones for tools. We would use the hooves for glue. We would use the brain for tanning the hide. We would use the sinew for cordage. The list goes on and on and on from what you could harvest from a deer. And like I said, the same thing goes for plants. When we harvest corn, we didn't just shuck the corn and throw the husks away. We would shuck that corn, let them dry. We'd make dolls for our children. We would weave floor mats. We'd weave moccasins. There was baskets. Thank you. I knew there was one I was missing. There were so many different things that you could make from something that people carelessly just throw away today. Even the corn cobs, after they were, eaten, were saved. They made great fire starters. And Susan, tell them about your home.
So I live in a 1769 colonial, and the part of the insulation in one of the wings was all corn cobs. So the colonists used it for insulation, but we throw it away today.
So there's so many ways that, I hope that the way Indigenous people interact with the land can be something that influences other cultures as well. Ours is, we recorded our history, our way of doing things in a different way. We didn't write things down in books. Instead, it was an oral tradition. We would share things through stories by word of mouth. And those stories were passed down from one generation to the next. Stories were also a way for us to teach our children how to be good human beings, how to interact with the world, um, the consequences for bad behavior. All of this was done through oral traditions. And the theme in a lot of those, the 7 principles of that Indigenous story work, is respect, reverence, responsibility, reciprocity, interrelatedness, holism, and synergy. That is woven in to all of our stories. Now, Europeans had a different way of, recording history, or, talking about events, teaching. They would do things by writing them down in books. That wasn't our way. My aunt said to me once something that really made sense to me. She said it was good that Native American people passed down their oral traditions, their way of doing things, their stories, way of life, by word of mouth. Because if we had written everything down in books, when we were forced to assimilate, those books would have been burnt and disappeared. All that history would have been lost. Some of the stories that I tell or that I learn are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And it's pretty cool. It's an amazing journey that I've been on, meeting other Indigenous elders, having them teach me their stories, and preserving, protecting, and passing those stories down to the next generation. So our way of thinking is a little bit different. And like I say, my hope is that other people could maybe change some of the ways that they're thinking to adapt some of these ways. Native beliefs that we are all related and equal. No one living thing is more or less important or worthy than the other. We are part and parcel of the whole. We are all equal. There's a lot of power that comes in that. The way I was raised, there is no one who is above me or better than me, and there is no one who is below me or less than me. We're all equal. And it's really been empowering, because I could meet somebody of power and wealth and just talk to them as if they're a human being. I don't fall into that worshiping, type of thing. And sometimes, they find that odd. They're used to being, fallen all over and worshiped, but they also enjoy being treated like a person, just like a regular person. A great power underlies all creation. It is the universal force to which all of nature is attuned. All things in the universe are alive and have a spirit within them. That goes for, like I say, plants, animals, trees, rocks, the earth. It all has a spirit. The individual is called upon to live in balance and harmony with the spirit world, and each of us has a responsibility to the balance of the system. So it's not one person's job, it's all of our jobs to live in harmony with nature. Values, beliefs, morals, ethics, and traditions are passed down through oral traditions, forming strong cultural bonds. And certain people in our communities have special ties to higher powers, which enables them to mediate between the spirit world and the earthly world. I think one of the most powerful ways of thinking that I wish other people would adapt is the 7-generational way of thinking. And for me to explain this to you, in Western knowledge, typically they only think about one generation, which is about 70 to 80 years. And they're only thinking about themselves. In Indigenous communities, we think about 7 generations. So here's an example of me and my family. In the center, it's me and my husband, or you and your family. I knew when I came into this world that 3 generations ahead of me were making decisions about, that would affect my life. For example, before any decision was made in our community, certain questions were asked. How would this affect people in the future? How will this affect the children? How will this affect the earth? And so on. And it's my responsibility as I go ahead in this earth, in this world, to think 3 generations in the future. So not just thinking about my time here on the planet, but my son's time, my unborn grandchildren, my unborn great-great-grandchildren, and so on. When you think in 7 generations, you're thinking over a time period of 840 years. So it could be, small steps that you take. For example, in my yard, I hate ticks. Oh, I hate ticks with a passion. Now, if I were selfish, I would take chemicals and I'd spray my yard and I'd kill every dang tick that was out there, wipe them off the planet. But I know what that would do. I know that I would only be thinking of my own selfish needs. And that if I did that, the poison that I sprayed to kill the ticks is also going to kill other bugs, other things that live in the ground. It's going to taint the soil. It's going to affect the food chain of, the other animals that eat those bugs. I also realize that if it rains, that poison isn't going to stay in my yard alone. It's going to wash down out into the street. It's going to travel in the storm drains. It's going to run off into the river that borders my property. And now that poison that I put in my yard has now spread to how many other people's yards? So it's that 7 generation thinking, that not only thinking about your inconveniences right here, right now, but think about those things that you do and how it's going to affect those future generations. How's it going to affect the children? How's it going to affect the animals? How's it going to affect the earth? How's it going to affect the air? And so on.
And biologically, women have 3 generations inside of them, and we're not aware of that. But what we do as an individual will affect our grandchildren, our children and our grandchildren. And I have a perfect example of that. I'm one of 3 siblings. Both my brother and sister only have 1 kidney. I'm the middle child. For some reason, I got 2. But it's not what my mother did. It's what my grandmother did that affected my mother's eggs, that affected my siblings. So just biologically, you can't separate, no one woman on the planet can separate themselves from previous generations or generations to come. So what you do has that cause and effect.
And that's why the choices we make need to be thought about differently. So what is traditional ecological knowledge? It's environmental knowledge that has been gathered by Indigenous people who have lived in and observed a particular area for generations. This information is passed down from one generation to the next. For example, when are the salmon going to run? What time of year would this be happening? They would pass this knowledge down from one generation to the next on how to do things. When's the best time to, catch these fish? How do you catch them respectfully? How do you make sure that there's, fish around for the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that? Often what we would do is have ceremonies during this time where there would be a celebration going on for 4 or 5 days, honoring the return of the salmon. That would allow a certain amount of salmon to move upstream without, being harmed. And then once that 4 or 5 days celebration ended, then it was okay to go in and start catching these fish. So it's part of our way of life.
And that's that generational connectiveness. They had to read the world around them and interpret it and how it best fit them. In our terms, that's called phonology. And just, I moved back to Connecticut in '03, the change that I've seen, both with the maple sugaring practices that I do, when certain birds arrive and leave, all that has literally changed in the last 20 years. So if you constantly keep, you know, an eye on that, the study of the seasons, you're going to be better able to help the environment around you.
We have to look at that web of life. We have to look at how every single being is connected to another being, and how they all rely on each other. If you remove one of those beings in this web of life, it affects all of that web, including human beings.
This is a great example. If you are standing in front of a bunch of students and you say, well, what does trees give? The number one answer will be oxygen. Well, we get most of our oxygen actually from the ocean. It's not from the trees. So most kids don't know that. And one tree, does anyone have a guess on how many different uses for humans and animals? Give me a number. It's less than 100. But if you can come up with a round number of how many different uses you can get out of one tree. Not bad. Well done. Yeah. Yeah, there's over 50 different uses. Not, yeah, you could probably come up with 75. Yeah, but then the number is immense from one tree. It's easily between 50 and 75 different uses. From a, you know, hanging a swing, putting a nest, hanging a sign, making a baseball bat, you name it. But yeah, well done.
Here's just some of the
Yeah.
things that Susan and her husband came up with when they were, you know, doing this exercise together. It's pretty remarkable. It really is. And we need to think about everything in this manner. You know, it'll help us make wiser choices, wiser decisions on the things that we purchase. So here's the differences. In Western civilizations, it's a commodity-based culture, consumer-driven economy. Land and resources are owned. There's domestication of animals, ownership of living things, including people in our past, single generation thinking, cultural imperialism. Language objectifies all things, and only human beings have rights. Unweaving information to obtain knowledge, and learning by formal education. In indigenous civilizations, it's a gift-based culture. We are told that we are stewards of the land and the resources. It's a responsibility that we know, you know, we need to do. Respect and relationship to all living things. And living things are seen as gifts. That 7-generation thinking, you know, leads to sustainability. Language teaches us to see subjects, not objects. Other species possess rights. We weave together information rather than unweaving it. We learn by doing and experiences. And language teaches that everything is both physical and spiritual. So you could see the drastic differences in the way that Western civilizations think and how, you know, they raise their children, and the way indigenous cultures think and how we raise our children. It's a big difference. And some of this, for example, land ownership that Western civilizations, you know, believed in indigenous language, in the Algonquin language, there was no word for owning land. That was a concept that didn't exist. We felt that you couldn't own land. How could you own land when so many other living beings are dependent upon it? So it's a whole different way of thinking. Um, the domestication of animals is another thing. We never domesticated animals. We allowed animals to live wild and free the way they were intended. And this ended up hurting us in history. Europeans domesticated animals. They penned them up, they had them in corrals. Sometimes they would bring them into their homes in the cold weather. They would walk along the streets where, horse feces would be. They would walk along their farms, dragging some of that, feces into their homes. After time, Europeans built up immunities to the diseases that domesticated animals carried. And they were able to fight, those diseases off with those immunities and knowledge of, medicines to use. Now, because indigenous people never domesticated animals, they never came in contact with those diseases. So when Europeans came here and they started trading good items like cloth and metal cookware and such, unknowingly, they also traded those diseases from domesticated animals. When indigenous people caught those diseases, they had no immune systems to fight it. They had no knowledge on how to treat it. It is said that at time of contact, 80% of Connecticut's indigenous people died from disease. Isn't that incredible? It wasn't from warfare, it was from disease because of that different way of interacting with animals. We talked earlier about the unweaving and weaving. So in Western science, they take things apart. They unweave nature's patterns to try to understand it and try to reconstruct them. It relies heavily on mathematical language and computer models. In traditional knowledge, the weaving of patterns, the weaving of things are woven together through experiences. One generation learns something and it passes that down to the next, and soon they have woven a different way of learning. It's all about reciprocity, love, land, and life that are constantly reinforced and nourished by our languages. Now, there's some common ground. In traditional Native knowledge, everything is holistic and inherent. It includes physical and spiritual world linked to moral code, emphasis on practical application of skills and knowledge, trust for inherited knowledge, respect for all living things, practical experimentation, oral traditions to pass down knowledge and way of life, and traditional sustainability practices. With Western science, it's skepticism, limited to evidence for explanation within the physical world, mathematical models, emphasis on understanding mechanisms, micro and macro theory, controlled experimentation to falsify hypothesis, educationally based. The common ground is pattern recognition, inference and prediction, cycles, connections, and changes in Earth systems, body of knowledge stable but subject to modifications, position and motion of objects, and most of all, hope. I just love this picture on the left. We are more connected than people, want to believe. For example, in our stories, we often talk about the tree of life. When you look at the lung sliced down a lung, look at how much it looks like a tree of life, right? That's a human placenta, excuse me. Tree of life looks like the human placenta. A tree stump looks so similar to a fingerprint. A lung looks so familiar to a tree branch. Leaf veins, human veins, river networks, they all look similar, right? Okay, let's try this one. There are many choices that we can make. There are many things that we can do different. There's hope. And I think that's what Jane Goodall, is trying to tell us. That yes, it is depressing. Yes, it does sound, it does sound horrible. But there are ways that we can make changes in our own lives, in our own way of thinking, that can get us out of this trouble that we're in.
I think an important way to look at the choices is 10,000 years ago and in 10,000 more years, every creature only needs those 5 basic things. And the humans have pushed the limits of our planet because we've gone beyond food, water, shelter, good clean air, and enough space to obtain the way we live. So I think that's very critical. When you make decisions, you have to think about what those decisions in a commodity based will have on your environmental impact. There you go.
Sorry about that, folks. Oh, and it's gotten dark. Look how
It's got dark. Yeah. I'm gonna
yeah.
take a second here and say thank you very much for all the information. It's given us a lot to think about. And quickly, I would like to know if there are any questions or comments people would like to share at this point.
There we go.
You're back.
You're back as a person.
Okay.
I didn't realize it got that dark so quick. I wasn't looking at myself. Sorry, folks.
While people might be thinking or trying to gather their thoughts, I do want to take a moment here and remind our group that next week we have another webinar, and that will be a presentation by, which is great, the Connecticut Green Bank, which is explaining and looking into how projects are funded, how investments are made, and how decisions can be made for a green culture. And it's wonderful to marry that subject in with this subject as well, because it has to blend 2 different thinkings. The other is on the 21st. There is a live workshop Saturday, January 21st at Goodwin University, where we'll have some hands-on activities and additional presentations for the climate change subject area. And the Indigenous cultural thinking will be there as well to give it a little more hands-on and a little deeper dive into this subject and applications to addressing climate change. And while I was talking, I believe there might have been a quick question that passed by.
Yes, I'm finding that answer.
It was looking for slides. You can take action.
Yep, I'm pulling it
Okay.
back up.
And that, looking at what are the actions and how actions can be selected and found, will be one of the focus areas coming up for not only the webinar next week, but also definitely for the in-person workshop itself, is looking at and evaluating actions and understanding concepts.
That will be more of a hands-on experience as well. Susan has come up with some awesome ways to, have you use your mind to think. Okay, I found the slide. You want to add anything to the next program, Susan, that we'll be doing?
No, just that it'll be more hands-on interactive activities.
So, yes, so please
Yeah.
make sure that you make your arrangements. Would you be able to show us what commodity-based thinking causes? Yes, it causes exactly what we have. It's
Yeah.
our commodity-based thinking. And yes, that is part of the discussion. The commodity-based thinking also is going to be a good illustration of when you're applying the En-ROADS Climate Action Simulator, because some of those decisions have to be made on an ethical basis. So when you're looking for equity and you're looking for applications and results, those areas are illustrated. And you have to decide, unfortunately, in our world, we do have to decide how money will be spent in order to address the issues that we've come to.
And it simply comes down to,
Mhm.
you know, we waste so much. We have to make those personal sacrifices ourselves. You know, gasoline is the biggest one that makes me crazy. Look at how much fuel we waste. Then we cry about how much gas costs,
Mhm.
right? You know, do we really need to drive our kids to school? Do we really need to drive them to the end of the driveway? You know, um, that's
Yeah.
the one that cracks me up. Meanwhile, we have buses driving right by your home, you know, that are using fuel. We have to make those sacrifices, you know, carpooling, thinking a little bit, you know, thinking a little bit beyond our own personal needs, you know, our own, what we, you know, what we want, and thinking, you know, a little broader.
Well, and individually, we Native Americans had to get up in the morning, traditionally 450 years ago, and they had to figure out how to survive. We don't have to do that anymore. So we've become incredibly lack of efficiency. We're not self-sufficient. We rely on every aspect, from having our hair cut to having our teeth done. All that creates more waste and more where you have to have an economy. So if the more we can become each individual self-sufficient and having the tools to negotiate the planet we live on, you're not going to be taking more than you need. And that goes back to those 5 basic needs. It does come down to a lot of self-sufficiency. Again, every animal, every plant on our planet had a role. We're now sort of the invasive species, and how we interact on the planet is affecting all those other species. Like Jane Goodall said, nature's resilient, and we may not be here, but they all may still be here. So we have to become self-sufficient as each individual, and that's going to make for a better planet.
Mm-hmm. And we have to realize that we are not all knowing, you know,
No.
Plants and animals, they were here long before human beings.
Right.
They had all of this figured out. We're just cocky enough to think that we have all the answers.
Right.
No, we need to humble ourselves. We need to watch. We need to learn.
All
you
the
know?
interconnectedness. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much, and everyone else who has joined us this evening and started thinking about issues in a different perspective and with a little more focus on ourselves as to what we are asking for and what we are willing to do. So I hope we'll see everyone again next week, and definitely on the 21st for some hands-on activities as well as some other insight.